Morning, everyone. Thanks, Jack, for those readings. It was a bit mean first day back, and I give you the Old Testament reading with all those names, just to make sure you're really awake and with us. It's lovely to be here, and it's an Australia Day weekend. All things Australian are coming out of the woodwork. I know that Kaylin, don't want to dob you in, but Kaylin spent some of Friday at a Bunnings sausage sizzle, which feels very Australian. But I think you said you didn't actually eat a sausage, un-Australian. I don't know, we'll have to have words about that. I didn't even show up, so I think he's done better than me. But it's funny how this time of year, a whole lot of stuff comes out about what it means to be Australian, and everyone's got a different view of that. How many of you have seen this year's lamb ad, the Generation Gap lamb ad? A few nods, a few hands up. My family, because I inflicted it on you. Jack's seen it. I'm not heartily endorsing it. I have mixed feelings about it. It's kind of amusing though. Essentially, if you haven't seen it, and feel free to go and look it up afterwards, but it features the generation gap. You've got the various generations, the boomers, the millennials, the Gen Xers, and they're all complaining about each other. And they're sort of the generation gap is represented by an actual physical chasm. So they're all in these parts of an Australian city, and there's these massive chasms between them. And then somehow, magically, one of them's cooking a lamb barbecue, and that somehow geologically and relationally brings them all together. I'm not sure where the vegetarians and vegans were, but somehow it brought them all together around lamb, because that's the Australian thing. And you might be aware that every year at around this time, the Australian Lamb Association, or whatever they're called, bring out an ad encouraging us to eat lamb. What was interesting about this year's one was that it didn't make any reference to Australia Day. It's very quiet about that. Now, can you blame them? Because that's a hot topic at the moment. Woolies have been in strife twice. First, they were in strife for not stocking Australia Day merch, and then they were in strife for promoting Australia Day food products. They couldn't win either way. So it is a brave company or individual that wades into the Australia Day cultural war. And I am not that person. So today I do not want to address the question of Australia Day and when should we celebrate it and when should we celebrate it. I'm going to set that aside as a very important and very thoughtful question to engage in, but I'm not trying to answer that question today. What I want to do is think more broadly about what does it mean to be an Australian Christian? What does it mean? What should our view of our nation be? How should Christians engage with their nation? Is it okay to be patriotic? And that then will probably inform your thinking around the specifics of things like Australia Day itself. Now, I've forgotten, I was going to give, I know some of the teenagers love to have their 5 words to find during my sermons, and I've already given 2 of them away, so this is going to be really easy for you. I should have told you at the start, but I want you to look out during this sermon. You can whack them in your phone if you need to. Lamb barbecue, probably tick that one off. Woolies, you can tick that one off. So here's your 3 you're looking for. Babylon, a razor, and left behind. So look out for those ones. Somehow that's going to connect, trust me. So what does it mean to be a Christian Australian or an Australian Christian? Which way should it go? We don't have the same challenge in Australia of Christian nationalism. That's it's mostly an American thing, if you're familiar with that idea. Although we do have some often quite vocal groups in Australia that might argue for a similar view. The idea that the nation is defined by Christianity and that the government should take active steps to keep it that way. I think most of us, Christian or non-Christian, have long accepted that Australia is not and never has been a truly Christian nation in that kind of government sense of the word. We tend to have much stronger attitudes around sporting nationalism. That gets us worked up. And that's the assumption, of course, that Australians should be, and in fact are, the best at any given sport, regardless of how we're actually performing. So that's a part of being Australian, sporting nationalism. But how should we view our nation? Well, the 2 Bible readings that we heard today give 2 slightly different perspectives on the question. And I want to explore each one of them and see how they complement each other and work together. So firstly, our Old Testament Bible reading, in that one we heard God's instruction to the Hebrew people about how to view the city of Babylon in which they were living in exile. And this kind of idea of living in exile in Babylon is a popular one to be used to describe how Christians should live in a secular world today. So they're told to build houses and settle down, plant gardens, eat what they produce, marry, have sons and daughters, find wives, increase in number, and lastly, to seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which they've been carried into exile. Pray for it, because if it prospers, you will prosper too. So context is important, of course. God, through Jeremiah, is not saying, well, looks like Babylon's the new holy city now. Oh, well, we might as well settle in here. But he's also not saying, well, he's not inciting them to rise up and overthrow the Babylonians, which I believe some of the false prophets at the time were encouraging. The context is he's saying, love the city you're in, work towards its flourishing, because ultimately you'll be freed from exile. In fact, we know in 70 years' time, God is going to free them. He's going to answer their prayers and return them to their true home. And so their hope is not that God will bring prosperity to Babylon, but that they will prosper and thrive ready to return to Jerusalem. It's a slightly different framework. But even so, the passage from Jeremiah seems to encourage us to be actively involved in the nation's life. We can do the modern equivalent of building houses and settling down, planting gardens and all of that. We can actively seek the peace and flourishing of Australia if we use that model. Tim Keller describes, and I've just got a tick for the Tim Keller lovers in the room, Tim Keller describes it this way in reference to Jeremiah 29. He talks about living on the razor's edge. He says, and this is quoting Tim Keller, he says, the Babylonians took the Jews to Babylon to destroy their culture and faith as they were assimilated into Babylon. Now, some Jews said, let's stay outside so that we don't lose our identity. But the Lord says to them, I want you to move into the city, but I want you to keep your identity. I want you to increase in numbers and to keep your faith, but at the same time to engage. I want you to seek its peace and prosperity. I want you to love it. That's the razor's edge, he says. Engage, but at the same time, be different. Don't assimilate and just pick up all the views of the culture, but don't stay out, keep your skirts clean, denounce everyone. No, live on the razor's edge. So Tim Keller puts it. Now, it sounds like a great idea, but it's complicated. Jesus was a master at living on the razor's edge, which brings us to our second reading. The Pharisees try and lay a trap for Jesus. And they've got their question about taxes. And so they're tapping into this tension of should we be part of the culture? Should we give into, in this case, it's Rome, not Babylon, or should we stay apart from it? And so they asked the question. Teacher, they said, we know, and they butter him up a little bit first, we know you're a man of integrity. You teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by others because you pay attention to who they are, pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Now, they're employing here that standard rhetoric of polarisation and tribalism. We still see it today. Which camp do you fit in? Are you either totally for us or are you totally against us? Knowing that either way, if he declares it, he's in strife. Is it Rome or is it Israel? Because if you say we should pay taxes, then you're un-Hebrew. I like being un-Australian. You're against us. But if you say we shouldn't pay taxes, well, you're clearly anti-Roman, and that's not going to go well for you. So come on, Jesus, which one are you? Which camp are you in? And Jesus, of course, has the great response, very well known. He says, show me the coin used for paying tax. So they bring him the denarius, and he says, well, whose image is on it? Whose inscription? They say, well, Caesar's. And so he says to them, give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. It's a great answer. So good that when the Pharisees heard this, it says they were amazed and they left him and went away. Now, I'm really frustrated by that because I kind of wish they'd hung around and asked a few more questions so that we could make sense of how are we meant to give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's and make sense of what that looks like. So I wish they'd hung around. A lot of people have given a lot of thought to this question over the years, and I want to draw on the work of a theologian called Richard Niebuhr, who's around in the 50s, I think, wrote a very well-known book, which I have not read, full disclosure, called Christ and Culture. And I've explored some of that. And he outlines 5 different stances that we can take for Christians and their view in relation to the world. And they're all helpful. Now, just to give a bit of a spoiler alert, each one of them has a kind of ring of truth to it, but will probably also make you say, yeah, but, until we get to the 5th one, which is, I think, what Neba's advocating, and which is where I kind of land. But they're all helpful. Now, to describe these, I don't know how this is going to work, but I thought it would be helpful, because they're kind of theoretical. It'd be helpful to have a visual demonstration as we go. And I haven't worded him up for this, but I'm really hoping Luke is going to be willing to come out and give me a hand. Now, you don't have to say anything, but would you be willing to come and be a visual demo for it? I thought you'd be up for it. So I'm going to get Luke to come up. Yeah, give him a round of applause. So, Luke, you're going to represent culture. In today's, come up here for now. I'm going to move you around a bit. But so this is culture. This is, for today's purposes, we're Australians thinking about Australian culture. So you're representing Australian culture. Now, it's a fine specimen of Australia there. Can you give it? Oh, he's given us a g'day, mate. Excellent. He's really embodying. So now I'm going to be the church. I'm going to be the Christians, and we're going to try and engage or relate with culture in 5 different stances. And I'll just direct you as we go. Now, the first one is Christ against culture, is how Neba describes it. So in this view, we would have nothing to do with culture. In fact, can you go and stand over there and face that way, please? Thank you. That's good. We would have nothing to do with culture. We're against it. We've condemned it. Culture is bad. This is the Pharisees in that second reading. They're all about religious purity and adherence to God's law. We're not paying taxes to Rome. We're not working. We'll only work with culture if we absolutely have to. Modern day, think of those groups that withdraw from society, isolate themselves in different ways, and view anything outside of the church as hopelessly lost, corrupted by sin. Sorry, look, I'm talking you down a bit here. The world's going to hell in a handbasket, so why would we even bother? We're going to keep ourselves safe and separate here in our pure little kingdom world. We'll talk a lot about the holiness of the church, and our best hope is that the Messiah comes quickly and ends it all so that we can get on. Now, you can see in this stance, there's not a lot of love for country here. As a Christian taking this stance, I really couldn't care less about Australia and Australian culture. I've dismissed them over there. So while we can hear a ring of truth in some of that, for me, it doesn't sit right. So let's try the second stance. Now, the second stance is Christ of culture. So come back over here. In this stance, the conflict between Christ and culture is removed, and we're going to live in harmony. In fact, we're going to be so harmonious. I want you to come and stand in front here. In fact, stand right in front of me there, because we want to be together. We want to be as one. So this is the Herodians, the Jews who Rome appointed Herod as a puppet leader of Jerusalem. And so these particular group of Jews got on board with this and said, fantastic, we can adopt Roman and Greek culture as it comes in, and that will be the flourishing of the people of Israel. And so we're just going to immerse ourselves in culture. Now, this happened numerous times in history. Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, declared the Roman Empire as Christian. He apparently had this great trick of marching his armies through a river, and when they came out, he declared that they were baptized, and so they were all Christians, which is one way to do it. You can see the problem with this, though. Like, it sounds all right, but the church has become completely indistinct from culture. In fact, some of you can't see me at all because Australian culture has totally taken over. I am not distinct at all. I'm not different in any way. And that's the danger of the second one, is that we lose our distinctiveness. Look, I'm going to come and stand next to me for a moment. You're off the hook for a second. Now, they're the two kind of extreme positions. And we know that Jesus didn't really satisfy either of those positions. The Pharisees, the Herodians, no one was happy, and they all went off in a huff. So Neba then says, well, let's go a bit more moderate. Let's see if we can take a more moderate view of culture here. So then we get Christ above culture. Now, God created the world. The church is kind of God's people. We're going to sit above culture. Can you just grab a seat on the steps there? That'd be nice. Make yourself comfortable. I mean, you're not banished or anything. So one version of this is the kind of what's called the deist view, the kind of picture of there is a God and God created the world and created culture and people and then said, off you go, and kind of stays separate from it. Not really interested in engaging with it. And so, as Christians, it's hard to kind of make sense of that. But then a Christian spin on that would be, well, we've got the world down there and the church is kind of separate and above all of that culture stuff. But we do have a role to engage with it. Now, our only role to engage with it is to try and save it, to draw it out and rescue it. And we want to bring the right parts of it, the right people with us. So in this case, this is where evangelism takes priority over everything else. The only contact we should have in the world is for the sake of evangelism, of rescuing the lost souls and bringing them to us ready for the coming kingdom of God. If you're familiar with the books or the movies of the Left Behind series, then there's some other theology that sits with it, but that's the kind of mindset they've got. The world's getting worse and worse. The best we can do is save what we can and wait until the day that Jesus comes and sorts it all out. So any love of Australia and Australian culture is going to be framed as we need to just say, it's a mission field, we need to just save some of them. So you probably sense things in there that you think, yeah, that's true. But if you're like me, there's also a bit of a, yeah, but. So let's try the fourth one. Christ the transformer of culture. So the fourth view, you're going to have to get up for this one. This is your last one, by the way. You're off the hook for number 5. The fourth view is Christ the transformer of culture. In this view, society is to be entirely converted to Christianity. So business, the arts, family life, education, government, everything, there's nothing outside the purview of Christ's dominion. Everything must be reclaimed. We want everything about culture to be controlled by us. In fact, this is going to test you out. I want you to mirror me as best you can as I talk. There'll be a bit of waving of arms around. That's good. So these are the Christians who love to talk about the culture wars because that's where the battle is. He's doing well. There's the ferocious battles in society, and they'll describe the enemies as pluralism. Should I make it hard for him? No, he's doing so well. Tolerance, or secular humanism. They're the enemies. And every issue is boiled down to black and white. Well done, you're good at this. There's either them or there's the Christians. And there is a Christian position on every issue. And if you disagree, it's very distracting for everyone, isn't it? You can stop now. He's done very well. So anyone who disagrees on any issue is clearly on the devil's side. So my engagement with culture is pretty much a combative one. Like, you will be like me, and if you're not, if we have a difference, then you're of the devil, you're evil. Again, there's some truth in it, but it's not quite there. 4 different stances in the way we relate to culture. I had no idea how to do the 5th one with a visual, so I'm going to let you off here. Let's give Luke a round of applause. Thank you for representing Australian culture beautifully. The 5th position, this is the last one. Niebuhr offers one that he says is hard to describe himself, which is a bit of a relief. And he calls it Christ and culture in paradox. These are the Christians who, here's the hallmarks of it. They don't think everything is black and white. In fact, they recognise there is a lot of ambiguity in the world. They understand Jesus' description of the kingdom as a mixed field with wheat and weeds. And sometimes it's hard to find our way through which is which. They know that Christians are to be in the world, but not of the world. We hear that a lot. So what does that mean? In spite of the difficulties and the messiness of the world, modern governments and cultures, all of those, they feel they're called to work within them the best they can without compromise. So there's some transformation going on there, but it's not a hardline transformation. They continue to affirm that God works in mysterious ways, often behind the scenes, and in fact, it's often God doing the transforming. Sometimes these Christians are suspicious and filled with hope because we're wary of culture, but we're also hopeful. I recognise this as an in-between time, and we're going to make the best of it. We know that God, the kingdom of God, has penetrated this world. We see evidence of the kingdom, and we rejoice and celebrate when we find it. And we're going to throw our efforts into the direction of the kingdom. We want the world to be more like God's kingdom. And so I think this affirms the kind of Jeremiah 29 pattern that we heard. Seek the peace of the city where I've caused you to be carried away captive. Pray to God for it, for in its peace you shall have peace. I think that's a good picture of what we're called to. Now, as I said, against culture, of culture above, transforming, there's some truth in all of those. Yes, we must strive for holiness. That's important, as the first type asserts. We must affirm with the second that the things that are genuinely good in culture. We must proclaim the good news and share the gospel where we can. We must be at work transforming this part of God's world. But we recognise that God's called us to live lives that are full of difficult paradox, full of ambiguity and irony. We seek to give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God. So as a Christian, can I love Australia? Well, this is my take. You do with it what you want. Our affection and our loyalty to a specific part of God's creation helps us to do the good work of cultivating and improving the part we happen to live in. So we can celebrate it. As Christians, we can and should love Australia and all its people, which also means working to improve our country by holding it up for critique and working for justice. It means Christians can and should seek roles in government, in industry, in policy making, education, if they have gifts and passions in those areas. And it means that we are called to love and to honour everyone in the nation that we find ourselves, with the hope that God will bring all things together in the future. So let that inform your thinking about Australia Day, and more broadly, your thinking about the place that you live. Celebrate the beautiful things about Australia and Australian people. Work for justice, seek good and the peace of our nation. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. Amen.